Water here. Well, good morning, everybody. How are you? Anybody think the market is real simple now? It's strange, huh? Yeah. We've witnessed things that we've never witnessed before. Who would ever think that would happen? But I do think what's positive, the stock market has rebounded dramatically. These potential tariff deals that are taking place, I think it's going to rebuild consumer confidence once again. Rates have actually gone up, unfortunately. So we watch yield on the 10-year treasury increase, meaning mortgage rates are following in tandem pretty much. So, but the CPI came out today, and it's been the consumer price index lowest in 4 years. So that's very, very helpful. I think with the next Fed meeting, who knows, maybe we'll see some type of positive movement in regards to them suggesting that they're going to reduce interest rates. And if the whole marketplace believes that the economy's slowing, I think we're also going to see the unemployment percentage increase. There's so many layoffs taking place. That's unfortunately is positive for the marketplace, and it's positive for us. We want to see interest rates come down so prices become more affordable. Although what we're not seeing, what it seems like at this point in time, is that the median price or the average price for properties has not come down, surprisingly enough. I think it doesn't help with all the fires in the Palisades, the cost of materials. None of that's beneficial. We did see nationwide a reduction in regards to the average price for new housing construction. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think the selling market may be prolonged this year. It may be taking place at a different point in time. I think what I'm seeing, based on all the activity in the office, and let's face it, we're at the ground level, buyers are very, very hesitant, and sellers don't want to give up any money. But you do need to counsel your sellers that this is really what they should be expecting. So if you want to close a transaction, they need to be negotiable. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting on the market for a long period of time. Any questions about that? So the first thing I want to start with, there's a number of things I want to go through at the MLS rules and regulations to be sure everybody understands their obligations. But one of the first things I want to start with today is the neighborhood market report. Does anybody here understand you can actually advertise somebody else's listing that's actively marketed?
Even though you don't ask permission for it?
Even though you don't ask for permission.
You have to disclose who's the listing agent.
That's correct, right? There are obligations that you must meet, but you can actually, a lot of us will advertise properties that have closed, and that's acceptable. And we need to explain that it's a compilation of information from the MLS, and we need to give dates, timeframes, and the actual disclaimers, so on and so forth. But the other thing you can do, you can actually create a neighborhood market report. And that's under section, let me look at it, 12.8.1 of the MLS rules and regulations. It's important, not that anyone's going to remember that. That's Jonathan will remember, I know. But you can actually put together a compilation of actively marketed properties on your flyer. And I don't know about you, but I think when I receive things in the mail, they're delivered to my doorstep, I think most people don't really recognize that when they're sending that maybe it's not that they're the listing agent. I think that they just think whoever's name and pictures on that marketing material probably presume that those are all of their active listings. And that is exactly what we want to portray here. But to use the so-called neighborhood marketing report, and it's limited. You can put it on flyers and things like that. So it is limited in regards to how you can present this, but you need to confirm through the MLS whether or not the actual listing agent is allowing you to use their active listing. Now, what I've discovered when I looked through the information on the agent one-line report on the MLS, I haven't come across anybody that has said, you cannot market my active property on the neighborhood market report. In the event somebody blanket or unilaterally or universally says you cannot market any of my active listings, they in turn cannot do the same thing. They can exclude a specific listing, but how do you make that determination? First of all, it's up to you to make the determination to confirm that the agent has not stated you cannot actively market their active listing on the so-called neighborhood market report.
Is it defaulted to yes?
It is defaulted to yes, unless the broker, makes a blanket determination that we don't want anybody else marketing it. But I have not come across anybody that's doing it. I don't think actually most people are paying attention to what they can or can't do. But if we were to say in a blanket statement that we don't want anybody to advertise our active listings, none of us not theoretically, but we cannot advertise somebody else's active listing. So what do we want to do? Whether we have a listing or not, we want to show these different listings and we have to give certain bits of information. But to make a determination whether or not the listing agent for that actively listed property is giving permission, or whether they know they've given permission or not, we need to look at the agent one line report. So Carlos, if you would just check on my agent line 1. And if we go to neighborhood market report, here's a response, NMR. And out of Carlos's search that he put together for me, and I don't know how many pages we have, it looks like maybe just one page. Not one person has said no, that you cannot actively market my actual listing. Yes.
So where do you answer that question? When you list a property, is that a box that you can choose yes or no?
I would say so. That's a good question. Yeah. If you don't want somebody actively marketing your property, from one standpoint, do you really care? Don't we just want to sell the property? Who cares, right?
That's when you key in everything in MLS to get to the point. that
You can
do it.
actually then make a determination whether or not that you would allow another agent to market that property as if it's their own. But still, you as a listing agent, it's required that you're being given credit for you, who you are as a listing agent. And Carlos has put together a great presentation that in a sense almost masks who the listing agent is. And isn't that what we want? We want the reader to look at that and think that Carlos Rodriguez has 10 active listings. And then you're going to be the preferred realtor in the area because you know the area. So this is your obligation, because if you actively market a property, or if you market a property that's actively listed without the consent of the listing agent,
Or pending, or pending.
well, if it's just an active listing,
Yeah.
right? Doesn't matter if it's pending or active under contract, but if you do that, it's a violation and the fine is substantial. But in this case, for all the properties that fall under this search, not one agent is stating that you cannot actively market my property using a neighborhood market report.
So but that's like an automatic authorization for everybody.
It is, it's an authorization for everybody, but how many people do that? Usually what we see advertisements that are delivered to the door, separate mail, that show all the past activity, not what is currently listed for sale. That's what I typically see when I see someone putting together marketing pieces, as a matter of fact. I think most people don't recognize that this is available to them. And that's why I thought it was important that we continue to emphasize this. So now we've made a determination, all these properties can be listed on your flyers in a neighborhood market report. And there's certain restrictions in regards to what you can and cannot list on there. You can put the size of the property, square footage, things like that. But would you show me the presentation you put together? So now, here is an example of a neighborhood market report. When you're looking at this, let's assume you put together a flyer in an area that you're trying to farm. When you're looking at this, and I thought this was brilliant on his behalf, the way you put it together. I see the address. And then I'm going to see Carmen's name here. That's what I'm going to see. What was that?
I wait.
You win.
No,
So do I, Carmen's.
I showed that one the first one.
But we have to give credit in a manner that is recognizable. That's our obligation, as a matter of fact. But the way he put it together, from my perspective, what am I focusing on? I'm focusing on the address of the property and whoever the listing agent is.
I think probably there's another regulation about the size, the listing agent, the real listing agent, their size, the letter size.
There's always obligations, but
There's we can make it really
Yeah, you can only make it so small, but I like the way he graded out in a sense to make it not as noticeable. And I would say that this kind of presentation is going to comply with the obligations of the rules and regulations of the MLS. Do you see that from where you're seated?
I can.
You can, but what are you focusing on? Obviously, the things I don't want you to focus on. So allowable listing content or information you can put in there, the address, whether the property is, there's, let's see, whether attached or detached, status, price, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, number of garages, whether attached or detached, square footage, lot size, year built, tractor development name, and if there's a pool. So I think it's a great presentation if you're giving consideration to marketing or farming any specific area, and you want to not only present properties that have sold in the past, and we have an example of that also for properties that are actively listed. I thought everybody would just be so thrilled when they look at this presentation. Hi.
So the ones that, let's say, it's closed,
Hmm?
we don't need to disclose the names. Just
You
one.
don't, you
The
don't,
ones
right?
that
You
are
just need to have the disclaimer indicating that it's a compilation from the multiple listing service
That's-
from whatever the date range is, as a matter of fact, and it has to be, I think, in 7-point typeface, as a matter of fact, to get back to Sunny's question.
So would the, like, active under contract and pending fall under the active that we have to disclose the names?
Yes, yes. So for anything that's actively listed, active under contract or pending, then yes, you would have to present it in the manner where to go.
No.
Yes, in this fashion, but there's no reason if you really don't want to go to the extremes that you can't present both actively listed properties and their properties that have closed, and you just include the disclaimer and the time frame from which you obtained an information from the multiple listing service.
Carlos, did you put this together, or is this a template that we can get from the site?
I put it together.
Okay, looks great.
I can share with you guys.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, no reason not to.
If you're presenting the seller, like you're the listing agent, like you want to put on MLS, everybody can say yes, everybody can advertise your listing, because that's really help you to sell your property.
It does. So it's a rarity that anybody's excluding their active listing from giving you the ability to put together or use their listing for the so-called neighborhood market report. I don't even think, and I'm sure it's true here, that any listing agent is even giving consideration to excluding it from the neighborhood market reports. Realistically, we just want to sell the property. But it is your obligation to check that information. And a listing agent, sometimes they become, well, upset if you're advertising or marketing their properties that are actively listed. And if they didn't change this, then there's nothing that can be done. They may file a complaint, but the complaint's going to be invalidated anyway. So you have no concerns about that. And that the MLS rules and regulations indicate that it's your obligation to be sure that the box is checked yes, that you can indeed use that active listing when farming your area. Okay. I like that. Let's see now. So that was the fun stuff. now on to the mandatory information, right? That we need to do. So now, Carlos, I need to share my screen.
I
You-
shared mine.
Okay, you did. All right. Almost there. So there's the MLS rules and regulations are about 57 pages now. Yeah. But I've chosen the things that I think are most important that I just wanted to review with everybody. So we're not getting any fines. We can expand that just a little bit. Okay, so let's go through this now. Listing procedures, section 7.2. So I'm choosing certain things that I think are the most critical aspects. Properties already listed by another broker. There are times in which there may be a dispute over a listing, and there could be two listing contracts. And in the event, let's assume there's multiple sellers or multiple individuals that have to sign a listing contract. And each party, let's assume it's a divorce situation. Each party, the husband signs one listing contract, the wife signs a listing contract with another broker. Well, they're both valid. We have just certain disclaimers that we have to provide in the MLS, but whoever gets the MLS or gets the listing on the MLS first is the winner. The other party, they may have a claim to compensation, but they're not going to be controlling the listing on the multiple listing service. So from my perspective, that's something very, very important. And then if you have listings that you may be taking a listing and not all parties have signed that listing contract that are necessary to sign that listing contract, you can take that listing contract, but there's going to be certain disclosures required on the MLS that you must provide, indicating that not all parties that are required to sign have indeed signed, or you may have to make a contingent upon obtaining everyone's signature. I see this look on your face.
Yeah, if both parties, husband and wife, didn't
Mhm.
sign the listing contract, how is the agent still able to collect a commission?
Because you've got, first of all, you've got somebody that signed it obligating themselves. Just
Doesn't it
because not
require
all
both?
parties have signed doesn't mean that they're not obligating their interest in the property to the commission.
So how that would work? So you get a commission from the husband and the other broker get a commission from the.
Well, that's a good question. How's that going to work, right? It's going to be a dispute. I can assure you of that. Because each party is going to be very unhappy in regards to what took place. But you may have the opportunity still, no matter what, regardless if you're in first or second position, to collect compensation. But probably one of the most important things is to control the listing on the multiple listing service.
So in this case, both agents, both broker get the.
Could be,
commission,
right, could be entitled to compensation, correct?
Or this one,
No, both,
both.
theoretically both.
But whomever is first on the MLS.
Gets the listing on the MLS. Because someone else cannot list that same property on the MLS as active. There's only one listing allowed for that activity. Let's say, for example, though, someone has a property listed. It doesn't prevent you as an agent from contacting that seller to provide other types of services, such as leasing activity. So it doesn't prevent you from doing that. So you can actually actively list a property for lease that may be listed for sale by a different listing office or agent.
You know, in a divorce cases, sometimes they don't agree with everything.
Sometimes.
And they want to have their own agent.
Yes.
So, and they don't believe in each other's agent. So, in that case, like for instance, I get a signature from the wife. The still husband has to sign, right?
Well, that's the ideal situation. In the event the husband doesn't sign or refuses to sign, you have an obligation to disclose that in the private remarks that all required signatures have not been obtained. And it could be contingent upon obtaining all necessary signatures to sell the property. So there is a specific disclosure that's required in the private remarks in the event something takes place, just as you have described.
Is that a form or just?
I'm sorry, 1 second.
You agree on one price, you tell them this is the price, and the other agent say, no, I can't sell you for much higher price.
So what? If you're on the MLS first, it's all that matters. You're controlling the listing on the MLS.
I say that regarding that she says it's a form or it's just remark.
No, it's just in the remarks. As a matter of fact, there is no form that's going to address that. And then I do see, we've had more co-listed properties. In the event there is a property that's co-listed that with somebody that is not a member of an MLS or a sister MLS, you cannot publish their information on that listing. Just keep that in mind. And then something that really wasn't applicable in the past, range pricing now. Let's see, 7.4. Range pricing. So on the MLS, you can actually publish information or a selling price from, let's say, the house is, we want to ask $1 million. We can actually publish range pricing from 990,000 or 999,000 to $1,035,000. Now, people would always question, why is there a range price? I think in today's environment, more than now than ever, that opportunity is probably more beneficial than ever before. And why is that? Because maybe, let's assume we have a property. On the MLS, we have a range price from 999,000 to $1,050,000. Why am I asking for $1,050,000? Because my seller is willing to pay the commissions at $1,050,000. So if a buyer's agent were to contact you and ask you, why is there a discrepancy between the low price and the higher price? I think it's a valid reason. If you offer 999,000, my seller is not going to pay the buyer's agent's commissions. If you offer $1,050,000, we're going to pay the commissions. So that could be a presentation that we haven't used in the past that may be applicable now, as a matter of fact. Before you had to have a valid reason. Well, from my perspective, that's a valid reason now to use possibly range pricing. The dilemma with range pricing in my example, if we have a range price between 999,000 and $1,050,000, what's going to be published on Zillow? And if you sort on Zillow, it's going to be focusing on $1,050,000. So if a seller, you have a listing contract and you agree to range pricing, and they're searching for a property at $1 million and less on Zillow, it's not going to show up. So Zillow is going to focus on the higher end of the range pricing. And that's important to most sellers, it seems like, from what I witnessed. They want to see their property showing up on Zillow.
So we will see things like that more and more.
I don't know if we're going to see it more and more, but I think it's a good strategy possibly in regards to how you may consider pricing that property and what you put on the MLS. I don't know how many people are giving that consideration because it was rare that we saw range pricing in the past.
And then how many agents are gonna know?
And how many agents are going to even know that that's available to them in regards to some kind of a strategy? So on the MLS, fortunately, the good news is, in my example, if they're looking for a property for $1 million or less, it's going to show up in the delivery of the information associated with the client gateway. Sellers are not going to see it on the MLS, but maybe you just had that discussion with the seller. This is how we can attract more buyers. However, it may not show up on Zillow if people are simply searching on Zillow for a property $1 million and less.
The search will show the higher.
It's all right. You're going to have to search on $1,050,000 in my example for it to show up in a Zillow search.
So that's the,
But I think if you speak to sellers and they're aware, that's really what's important. They want to know, they want to see that property on Zillow, but this is an opportunity. Let's face it, a lot of people see this information on the client gateways. Zillow, it may not show up until they search for the higher dollar amount. And then I think there's always confusion about delivery of the listing to the MLS. So section 7.8. The listing broker shall input into the MLS all properties located in the MLS service area within 2 days of the effective date of any lease agreement on any exclusive right to sell listing. So you have, once a listing contract is signed, and it doesn't require your signature as a listing agent, you have 2 days to put that information into the multiple listing service. Now, what is an effective date of a listing contract? It's the date of the last required signature. Husband and wife signed, they signed 2 different days. 2 days following the date of the last signature, you have 2 days to put it into multiple listing service.
Or the beginning date.
Or the later, right, thank you for pointing that out. Or the later of, so the later of the last signature, the date of the last signature, or the beginning date of the listing contract. If you look at the listing contract on line 3, there's a beginning date. So what's the date today? I don't even know what it is. So let's,
13th.
all right, so, thank you. So let's assume we have a listing contract for the beginning date of June 1st, and they all signed before then. it needs to be in within 2 days or entered within 2 days following June 1st. However, if I have a listing contract that I dated, the beginning date was May 1st, and it's signed today by all the required parties, then the beginning date is the date of the last signature, and I have 2 days following that to enter that into the multiple listing service.
Is this rule applied to all the dates, like for instance, when it's a pending, when it's closing, so?
Yes, it does, as a matter of fact. There is a pattern, so it's always 2 days. It's not 2 business days. So when you change a status or when you're required to change a status, you have 2 days to change a status. Or if there's a price change, for example, and there's something in writing from the seller indicating a change in price, you have 2 days following the instruction for you to change the price.
So everything is a pattern.
Everything is 2 days. There's always an exception. And the one exception would be, let's assume we have a property that is in a coming soon status, or it's in a registered status, and we'll touch upon those. But if it's registered and I market it to somebody outside of the existing broker license, then I have 1 day to put it in a multiple listing service as an actively listed property. So registered properties, you're not marketing that to the public. But if you start marketing it to the public, you have 1 day thereafter to put it in the multiple listing service as an actively listed property. If you have a coming soon property, because a coming soon property, you cannot show the property based upon the rules at least. Somebody might cheat. But as soon as you do, you have 1 day to put it as an actively listed property in the multiple listing service. Even though coming soon is an actively listed status, you just don't have the ability to show the property in the coming soon status.
Would you please explain then from, sometime I see under contract, sometimes it said pending.
I'm going to touch on that. I'm just not there yet. And then registered listings, does everybody know what registered listings are? All right, thank you. Good answer. I take a listing and there's a form attached to the listing contract called the MLSA, Multiple Listing Service Addendum. If I take the listing today, the beginning date is today, everyone's signed today, so let's simplify it, but it's not going to be actively marketed until June 1st. On the multiple listing service addendum, the MLSA, which is attached to the listing contract, there's a field in there that says don't market it until June 1st. However, I have an active listing, right? Because the date's signed today, the beginning date is today. You have to register that with the multiple listing service. And if you don't, you have 2 days from the date, once again, to register it. Once that listing contract with all the criteria I just described is done. And if you don't, it's a violation. It's a $1,500 fine. So why would we want to do that? So you need to register it. When you try to log into Matrix, at the screen, there's a field that talks about registered listings. And it's 5 bits of information: the address, listing price, so on and so forth. And that is not, a registered listing is not a part of the MLS. You can't find it on the MLS. So it's not searchable from that perspective. The only people that can search registered listings is the broker for that office. But if the point is, you must register that listing. I have an active listing, even though it's not actively being marketed, because on the MLSA, I said I'm not going to start marketing until June 1st. But you must register it. And then once you register it, before it goes active, you have to convert it to an actual active listing by going into the registration and converting it to an active listing. So it doesn't mean going into the MLS and creating a new listing. You go into the registered listing aspect or status and convert that to an active listing. Now, hopefully, I'm answering that question. So registration, it's for a property in which I have a valid listing contract. And why do I want a valid listing contract today, even though I'm not going to actively market until June 1st? Because what?
Want to get paid.
Yeah. That's the whole reason. As if the buyer comes in and the seller sells the property, I'm entitled to compensation. So that is the whole reason for doing that. Even though the property may not be ready to be marketed, you want to be protected. Because in my example, if I took a listing contract and I just said the beginning date is going to be June 1st, and I'm going to start marketing it June 1st, and the next door neighbor came in and said, oh, I want to buy your property, I've been waiting for you to move, you're not entitled to anything if they enter into a purchase contract before that June 1st date.
So what's the actual definition of marketing? Because what I'm thinking is, so you get your registered listing, you're not going to market until June the 1st, but you get on the phone to 2 or 3 people who you know who might.
That's
be-
marketing.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yes.
That's considered marketing.
Yeah, so
You
examples.
can't do that until June 1st.
Yes, so your obligation would be if you start marketing in in the manner you're suggesting, you have an obligation within 1 day to place it on the multiple listing service as an active listing.
In the listing agreement, there is a place where somebody can opt out of the MLS, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because the listing contract is going to override them they can opt out of certain dissemination of aspects associated with that listing on the internet, things like that. But in no case, and the listing contract addresses this, if you actively start to market that property, the broker has an obligation to put it on the multiple listing service. So there's nothing that the seller can do to prevent you from putting it on the MLS. As a matter of fact, there's an obligation for the agent, otherwise you're going to be fined. So it's very simple in that regard.
So the 2 days start from the date that they sign, not the date that they come back.
The date that, whenever, so remember, the effective date of that listing is the date of the last signature or the beginning date. So that's when you have to have it in the MLS.
Yes, so the 2 days after they sign.
Yeah, so let's just simplify it, say after they sign. But when you put it in 2 days later, so let's assume you put it in, the beginning date of the listing contract is June 1st, but you put it in on June 3rd. When you put it into multiple listing service, you have to say that the effective date of that listing contract is June 1st. Because a lot of people will just say, oh, I'm putting it in on June 3rd, so that's the beginning date on the MLS, and that's not correct.
It has to be.
Yes.
You know, for instance, the reason that I asked, for instance, I get a signature, but they don't want to put it until 3 weeks from now.
All right.
Because they are working in the house.
Yeah.
So the 2 days would start from the date that they want to put it in an ML
No.
active.
If they sign that listing contract and you want it effective as of the date that they signed, you have to register that listing within 2 days of that signature. It's not available on the MLS. So the 2-day time frame is very consistent throughout everything. As a matter of fact, you have to register that listing. And then by that later date that they want to begin, once the work is done, then you would convert that registered listing to an active listing on the MLS.
And how many days they have to cancel that?
To cancel what?
That if they decided not to go with.
Once they've signed that listing contract, they have no entitlement to cancel your listing agreement. And I'm not going to cancel unless you want to cancel. I can assure you of that. Sellers will want to cancel a listing contract, and unless the listing agent in this office wants to cancel that contract, I'm not going to cancel that contract. They're obligated.
Expiration date.
And well, the expiration date, right? But that I have no control over that. Yeah.
In the listing for a lease, there's a portion that says if you find a tenant and the tenant then decides to buy the property, it's a little thing that says 30 days or 90 days if they decide to buy the property. But do you need to register that, like, they might be able to pay somewhere?
No, there's nothing that, in terms of registration, there's nothing that's gonna notify you or give you notification. You're gonna have to follow up
Or
with.
they do the say 3 months, you say, I wanna buy this property, you're entitled for that covers you for them.
Well, if you're the listing agent, there is a clause in the lease listing agreement that allows you to state that in the event that tenant buys a property, you could be entitled to a commission. So you could do that first of all.
Yeah, but if you are the buyer agent,
You're the buyer's agent?
how you protect yourself?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I don't know how the seller or the property owner would have to agree to sign that document with you, that you would be entitled to commission. There is a lease tenant commission agreement in which you can state that if this tenant buys the property, I'm entitled to commission. But if the landlord or the property owner refuses to sign that, you're entitled to nothing.
Because I have a client that they're going to, like, the
Yeah, but
property
they-
we did, they wanna buy in 3 months after that.
Yeah, I think it's the LTRC, the lease tenant rental commission agreement, you know, that's how that's completed. Would dictate whether or not you're entitled to commission if they buy the property at all. So if there's nothing in there, and what I will say, I don't see most agents completing that. First of all, on that lease, the LTRC, you're typically asking the rental property owner to pay the tenant's agent's commission. Are they willing to do that? Maybe. Are they willing to pay the commission and also obligate themselves to a commission to you as the tenant's agent? Probably not. If I were them, I would say, I'm not signing that, but there's no reason you can't try to do that.
Well, but the tenants, they need to create an offer again. So they're gonna use me to create an offer by
Yeah,
that, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah, in a sense, unfortunately, there's no offer document for leasing property. There should be. Just like we submit a purchase contract, but there's nothing that's that eloquent that assists us in regards to submitting an offer to rent a property.
Plus, the representation agreements only last 3 months, so.
Yeah,
How do
yeah.
you bypass the 1-year lease?
Well, actually, that's true for a purchase, but that's not true for a lease.
Right, but if you were to get a representation agreement saying that they're gonna use you after the lease expires, then that wouldn't work because that representation agreement would only be good for 3 months. You're talking
people
about
can
purchasing
rent
after
it.
lease, after the lease,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Couldn't you date it at the end of the rental period? At the beginning? If you know that their lease is up on the 1st of January, you could do your document starting the 1st of January.
You're talking about the tenant
Representation.
representation agreement?
The buyer representation.
The buyer-
agreement after, yeah.
But there's a difference between a buyer representation agreement and a tenant representation agreement.
Right, but I think she was asking if you could have them sign a buyer representation agreement during the leasing process, right? When they get accepted and sign the lease.
You could, right? But
But
that's limited to 3 months.
Yeah.
All right, you can extend it, but I don't know if people are willing to.
No, they don't sign that.
They probably don't, but they can, even if they sign it, you know, it's only a 3-month duration of time. That's the worst case. Even if it's exclusive, it's still, they can give a 30-day notice if you haven't modified the contract itself to terminate the agreement. So, but once again, for a tenant representation agreement, there is no time frame or limitation in regard to how long you can obligate a tenant under that agreement. But once that agreement's fulfilled, it's terminated, by the way. It doesn't, so I rented a property today. Let's assume I had a tenant representation agreement for 5 years. I rented a property today, it terminates. I can't continue to collect on them for the next 5 years if they rent tenant properties.
So Rich, I have a question. None of our agents have ever done this, by the way, but are you allowed to enter a listing into the MLS without having a listing contract? No one here has ever done that.
No one's ever done
I'm
something
just
like
asking.
that. No, you can't enter a listing into multiple listing service without having a valid listing
What,
contract.
is there a
Yes,
fine
there's a
associated
penalty,
with it?
right? So the fines are about $2,500. And then
Wow.
also,
Nobody wants that.
it's amazing, you know, that, you know, for anyone here that's had listings, you can see we police all of our listings, right? We're looking at the MLS and making sure that we actually have a valid listing contract in our possession for many reasons. And it's for your protection too, because if you don't, not as only is it a fine, but then also it's a Civil Code 1086 violation. So let's assume the MLS or you're brought in front of the panel, the tribunal, and they find that you've been in violation of having a listing contract. Well, not only that, but they can report it to the Department of Real Estate. So that's when it becomes really serious. It's not just paying a fine, but then again, who knows? With the Department of Real Estate, we never want to be in front of them. You're saying something?
One more question
What's that?
regarding this mandatory. The reason why I was asking my question earlier, this might have changed because years ago, I did have a listing of a lady. She did not want her home in the MLS because she didn't want her family from Oregon to know that she's selling it. And there was an MLS exclusion form at that time that we put in and so on and so forth. Is that something that?
The exclusion form, what's taken the place of that is something called the MLSA. the multiple listing service addendum. And it still has the same language in a sense, but also in the listing contract, it says within 1 day of public marketing, the agent has an obligation to put it in there. So it doesn't matter what they want. It is your obligation, otherwise you're in violation. That's really what it comes down to now. So the clear cooperation policy is maybe overcoming or dictating, forcing a seller to not do or to do something that they don't want to do. So any form of public marketing, I would think that what is not public marketing? It is defined as having a disclosure regarding agency relationship signed within 1 year of the date of the time that you've shown that property. That is the only exclusion for what would be public marketing. So you have a listing, she doesn't want it on the market. I don't know how you advertise it, but you came across a buyer. And before you present that property to them, if you have the AD disclosure signed, you can then present that property without being in violation. If there's something on Facebook, a sign, or they start marketing it, you're probably going to be held in violation if another agent reports you. Yeah, so you can't not put it on the MLS, excluding you have an agency disclosure signed by whomever it is you're presenting that property to. So if you have a buyer who's interested in whatever property, say, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to sign this agency disclosure, and it doesn't obligate them to anything. But now it's no longer considered public marketing if you present their property to them.
Does it matter if it's signed before you get the listing or after you get the listing on the buyer side?
Well, what matters is before you present the information to them.
Okay.
So if I have it signed today, as of today, and within 1 year prior, as long as I sign it within 1 year prior, then I can actually present that listing to them. As odd as it sounds, but that's how they define something that's not deemed to be public marketing. And then you can actually disseminate, if you have a listing, that information to anyone who's associated with you under the same broker's license. That is not deemed to be public marketing. And that's what was the name of the brokerage? Compass is continuing to portray. And a hearing I just sat on in regards to this agent who filed a complaint against another agent, she was disseminating the information to another agent. And she was in violation. She had no idea. She just said, oh, it's a Compass private listing. Well, as soon as you go outside of that license, it is public marketing.
Another way to go about that would be a single party compensation agreement, right? If you have a buyer for the seller and they don't want to list it, and you just go directly,
Yeah, but you still need the agency disclosure before you present it to them. That's secondary. Okay. So we've discussed a lot of things here. So that's the good news. Change of listing information. If there's any information in regards to the change of listing, what's the most common thing? Price. So you have 2 days to enter that information into the multiple listing service. And then let's see, 7.13. Contingencies, any contingency or condition of any item in a listing shall be specified and noticed to the participants. So in the event the seller wants to make the sale of their property contingent upon finding a replacement property, you should put that into the private remarks, as a matter of fact. And then section 7.15, no offers of compensation in the MLS. A broker may not input or otherwise use MLS in any capacity or in any field, media or document uploaded to the MLS to offer or convey any amount or any willingness of the listing broker to share a commission with the buyer broker, or for a seller to offer a specific compensation amount to a buyer broker. So what's interesting about that, so you can't in any way specify anything in terms of compensation being offered, whether the seller is willing to pay it or you as the listing agent has, or you're willing to pay that, as a matter of fact. But what you can do in the public remarks, you can actually specify that the seller is willing to pay concessions. You can't specify that simply for commissions, but you can make a remark in the public remarks indicating the seller is willing to offer concessions. And concessions, that term is very broad. Closing costs, commissions, things like that. So that's an interesting aspect, huh? So once again, in the public remarks, you can make that kind of statement. And then 7.19, what was that? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear him. No,
Just the concession.
just the fact that seller is willing to pay concessions. Yes. That's a good question, though.
What about those that they are, like, going through the court? So
A probate sale?
You know, it's a state. You
Uh-huh,
know, like
yeah.
they have to go through the court. Due to the amount, I saw that they put the amount, is that
The amount of what?
concession?
The amount of commission? There's, from my perspective, there is no exception in regards to publishing commissions.
So I just saw one not long time ago, recently, that it said it's $15,000.
Is that before August of last year? Well, I say that's a violation. You cannot offer anything in terms of agent compensation to the cooperating broker. That is distinct.
So what about those new communities that they invite us to see the community court?
Well, it
We
depends
offer
if it's on the
something?
MLS or not. If it's not on the MLS, because there are times that new home sales may be listed on the MLS. If it is, then they're subject to the same regulations. But if it's not on the MLS, they can offer that, right? In some other form of advertising.
Yeah.
Well, you, as a listing agent, you can also offer compensation to somebody by your advertising. It just can't be on the MLS.
Yeah.
Let's see. And then section 7.19, you have no obligation as a listing agent to in any way, nor can you disclose the amount of compensation you're earning. But what is required by the MLS is any compensation paid by the seller to the cooperating broker is to be mentioned in the multiple listing service. You have to disclose that information. But any commission that the buyer's paying to the buyer's broker, that is not a requirement, nor is there any field for you to enter that information on the multiple listing service. So, and then something that happens quite often, 7.20. If you are selling your own property, you must mention the fact in the private remarks that you have an interest in the property. So please never forget that. It should also be a part of the purchase contract too. And then 7.22, expiration, extension, and renewal of listings. Listings shall be changed to the appropriate off-market status on the expiration date. That means when you put a listing in, you should put in the appropriate expiration date, and the system will automatically do that, right? And then if there's going to be an extension of a listing contract, you must have that authorization in writing before you change it on a multiple listing service. And that's true of any change in status, excluding going to active under contract or going to pending. But if you're going to change it to hold or withdrawn, you need to have explicit written instructions from the seller, as a matter of fact. And then what's very important, if you have a listing agreement and it's expiring or it has expired, you have 7 days or 7 days, and day one is the date of the expiration of the listing, to get a written instruction from the seller to extend the expiration date of that listing agreement. So this allows us to do that even following the actual expiration. So we should be able to update that, as a matter of fact. And just so you're aware, the calculation of days on market is based upon the MLS number. The calculation of cumulative days on market is based upon the APN number. So there's a difference. So days on market, it's based upon the MLS number. So if the listing expires, when a new listing is drafted, the days on market will start counting over. However, if it hasn't been expired or canceled for at least 90 days, the cumulative days on market will represent the total days on market that that property has been listed. So people ask, well, can I just take it off the multiple listing service, cancel it, so all the days on market start over? It's going to have to be off the market for 90 days in a canceled status, or there has to be an arm's length sale of the property for the cumulative days on market to start counting over. Yes, exactly. Tells you everything. Click on the APN number, you can actually see the entire history of that listing too. So it's very helpful if you have interest in that. It's usually buyers that are concerned, you know, they wonder why the property hasn't sold. And then this could be applicable, dual rate commission. This is something that has changed from what it was before. But the existence of a dual commission arrangement shall be disclosed to the listing broker by a key code or a symbol as required by the multiple listing service. A dual rate commission arrangement is one in which the seller agrees to pay the listing broker one set rate of commission if the buyer is represented by a buyer broker, and a different commission rate if the buyer is unrepresented or if the transaction occurs because of the efforts of the seller instead of the listing broker. Why is this important now? Well, there's an undue advantage theoretically in favor of the listing agent. If I take a listing contract and I say I want to be paid 3%, but there's a field on a listing contract that says if the buyer is unrepresented, I want to be paid an additional 1% for the work that I'm doing, that is now a dual rate or variable commission agreement. And if you flag that appropriately in the MLS, any buyer's agent has the opportunity to ask you what that is. Why would that be important? Well, I have a listing contract as 3% for the listing agent. I'm going to earn 1% if I'm representing the buyer for an unrepresented buyer. If you choose to do it in that way, you can represent the buyer, so it's different. But I'm an agent who's representing a buyer, and I see how you flag that in the multiple listing service, and I want to earn 3% representing my buyer. So now I have an obligation as a buyer's representative to ask the listing agent, well, what are the terms of this dual rate agreement? Now I know that if the listing agent is only going to charge for helping the buyer who is unrepresented, is only going to earn 1% more, well, I want to earn 3% more. It's a distinct advantage to the listing agent. Not only that, but the buyer's agent has an obligation to disclose that to their buyer. Yeah, the listing agent is only going to earn 1% if you work with them, even though they're not actually going to represent you, they're just going to help you. But you have to pay me 3%. So I think that's a reason to, when I'm taking a listing contract, maybe it's a strategy to tell a seller, hey, I have an obligation to change the status on the MLS to make any buyer's agent aware that I'm going to earn 1% if I work with the buyer, even though I'm going to have them sign a buyer non-agency agreement. And you're only going to pay me 1% because any buyer's agent is probably going to want 3%. So why don't you just sign the listing contract agreeing to pay me 1% more in the event there's an unrepresented buyer? It's a thought, right? It could be a presentation to any specific seller. I would say any buyer's agent is probably going to come in asking for 2-3%. I can't imagine them not doing that. Yes.
But 2.5%, 1% coming from buyer, right? For the seller.
Well, it would come from the seller in that case. I have a listing contract. I'm going to earn 2% for just representing the seller. And then on that same listing contract, once again, there's a field that says if there's an unrepresented buyer, I'm going to get an additional 1%. And how does that work? Well, you would have the buyer sign a buyer non-agency agreement, and you can provide all the forms and documents to them. You're going to be doing a lot more work, but maybe you earn 1 additional %.
And that coming from seller.
That comes from the seller. However,
I cannot charge the buyer any.
Because you're not representing them. But the buyer probably has a relationship with another agent, and maybe that buyer's agent has a buyer representation agreement signed at 3%. So would the seller want to pay 1% for me to help the buyer, or will they rather pay 3% to an agent who's actually representing the buyer.
But isn't that the case that when we are buying, getting the form signed, a buyer agreement? Regardless if they go with us or any other agents, they have to pay that commission.
Not necessarily, because it depends what kind of an agreement if it's non-exclusive, they can cancel within the same day's notice. If it's exclusive, the most they have to give is a 30-day notice. That's the most. And if the buyer refuses to agree to a 30-day notice, which is the max, they could say, I want to be able to cancel within 1 day. But it might be just a way to structure it with the seller to say, hey, you only have to pay 1% more, as opposed to an agent who's actually representing the buyer who's probably going to come in asking for 2 to 3%.
So if somebody comes, they sign their agreement just recently, I have to see that if it's exclusive or non-exclusive, and then offer that.
Well, realistically, the concern would be if you're the buyer's agent, you have an obligation to disclose the fact that if I represent you, you sign an agreement with me, which you're going to pay me 3%. Whereas if you buy the property on your own, unrepresented, you're not going to pay anything, and the seller is only going to pay 1 additional % more. So which offer is the seller going to accept?
But this is for non-exclusive.
No, it could be exclusive. It depends because the exclusive agreement, the default time frame which somebody can cancel an exclusive buyer representation agreement is 30 days. But if the buyer changes that to 1 day, then there you go.
So it could be 30 days. As soon as they sign, they have 30 days to cancel it. But if they cancel after.
No. The maximum time frame for a buyer representation agreement is 90 days, 3 months.
Right.
But
They have 30 days that they are able to cancel.
they only have, if the default time frame is honored in the buyer representation broker compensation agreement, the maximum time frame to terminate a contract if the buyer wishes to is a 30-day notice.
After 30 days, they cannot.
No,
No,
if
I'm
let's
just
say they want to
saying-
cancel after the second week, or they're a month into it.
I can give
it
you a
doesn't matter.
30-day notice that I'm canceling. I don't want to work with you anymore, so I give you my 30-day notice.
Oh, okay.
Anytime during that period.
Yes, anytime during that period.
Anytime, but it's like 30.
Yes, that's the default time frame.
So Rich, in that example, the buyer would have probably come from an open house, right? Because you can't show them the property without having a representation agreement signed as a listing agent.
That's correct. You can't show the property without a buyer representation agreement
Unless they walked into the open house.
unless it walks into the open house on their own.
That's true.
And then 726, I'll just kind of glance over this, but right of listing broker and presentation of counteroffers. The listing broker has the right to participate in the presentation of the counteroffer to the buyer's client. And if the buyer's client doesn't in writing state that I don't want the listing agent to participate, the listing agent has the right to do that. Isn't that interesting, huh? 8.1, listing agreement and seller's permission. You have to have a listing and contract before you put a listing into the MLS. Must be in writing. 8.3, accuracy of information. That's your obligation, right? That you need to be sure that is accurate. If it's not, then you very well could be in violation of the rules and regulations, and that could be a civil code violation too, by the way. And where does that happen often? Especially with square footage, and so that's always an issue. What's that?
A lot of listings have in the private remarks, listing agent recommends that, all this information to be verified, so do they kind of free themselves from this, from the complete accuracy?
I don't think so. I don't think it does anything.
Most people write. So that
Yeah,
doesn't
they
matter.
write that. I think it's meaningless, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, they say, oh, you should get an inspection. Well, actually, yeah, we go a step farther. If somebody refuses to get in, if I'm representing a buyer, that we want the buyer to sign an inspection waiver, a buyer inspection waiver. But if it's the listing agent, they're not gonna be able to get the buyer to sign an inspection waiver. There's no obligation for the buyer to do something like that. So, and then section 9.1, skipping through some of these for various reasons. Showing the property. You please follow the showing instructions. Carlos had this happen, right? People show up at the doorsteps and it causes problems, right? You can't just go to a property. Be sure you follow the showing instructions. Otherwise, it's a violation. And then you're going to be held in front of a tribunal, could cost you money. It's just not worth it to knock on a door without permission to do that.
Could be a couple of violations.
It very well could be. And then this one's very important. 9.2, disclosing the existence of offers. Well, if you have the seller's approval, you're entitled to disclose other offers received. If you don't have the seller's approval, you have no obligation to do that. If you don't have the seller's approval, you have no obligation to disclose the fact that maybe you're the one who obtained an offer and are representing both parties. So if you don't want to give that information to somebody who's making that inquiry and I'm the listing agent, tell them I don't have the seller's approval to disclose any of that information to you. I don't want to tell somebody that I'm double ending this transaction. So you don't have the seller's approval.
Is there anything in anywhere in the contract that they can opt in or opt out of that, or
Nothing I'm aware of.
it would just be something in writing?
Yeah. I'm sorry, in the listing contract, it probably gives us the ability, but I would just say that seller is not giving me authority, to disclose whether I have received any offers or who is representing the buyers. That would have been my approach. I guess it all depends upon the circumstances, right? And then 9.3, availability to show or inspect a property. So clear cooperation. You have an obligation if you're the listing agent to allow people to leave a property. And what we see a lot of times, people will say that the listing goes active today, but no showings available till Sunday. That is a violation of cooperation. So you can't put it on and say, oh, you can't see it. So you violated the rules and regulations. But what you could say is, I've contacted my seller and the seller doesn't have availability for you to show your client the property. So let's just be smart about that. Don't publish that information saying it's active today, but no showings until a week or a month from now. Yes.
It's so common to see that, actually.
Oh yeah, it's very common.
On a database, every listing becomes active. They pretty much advertise it today. They said like, oh, no showings today, open house.
Yeah, click on submit violation or button.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've done that before, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
so.
You violated the guidelines or you
Yeah, based on this, yes.
filed an anonymous complaint.
Yeah. Right.
So if it's
Lot of
active, we cannot say that.
They can't say that. It's just foolish to say something like this. Now they're violating the rules and regulations.
Said coming up.
Yeah, we can
Well-
do coming soon, right?
Coming soon is different. You can't show the property when it's coming soon, but if you just have an active status, and then you also write in the private remarks that the property is not available for showing for a month from now, that's a violation. Don't say that. Just when you field phone calls or emails, say, I'll contact my seller and my seller doesn't have availability and we'll schedule that.
And can we state that like in the description, private remarks?
State what
The
exactly?
Seller does not.
No.
Allow or something.
No.
Call you.
Yeah,
can
when
put
they
it on
call
hold.
you, exactly, or they email you, that's when you're responding. I contacted my seller. Seller said that he's not gonna be, or have the property. He said that you can approach or come into the property on a specified date.
And if they know that they're not gonna be able to show, you can always put it on hold, right? And then there's no showings when it's on hold. Like
Yeah,
after
right, there's no
you-
showings
yeah.
if you want it, but then you need something in writing all the
Right,
time,
right.
right?
Would you say, open house is on X day, for any other showings, contact me to schedule? And then when
Absolutely.
they contact you,
Yeah,
you
just
contact
contact me
yourself.
for showings, exactly, yeah.
So I can say no.
Yeah, so I can say I contacted my seller and the seller has a party going on.
That's a long party.
And then section 9.6, you as a buyer's agent, you have the right to participate in the presentation of the offer to the seller. unless the seller gives written notice that you cannot do so. Yeah. I know Mark Ochoa told me that his agent he's spoken to or worked with said that's what this guy does in every single case. He insists that he be present, or he always make the presentation of the offer to the seller.
I heard from a couple of agents that, when they submit the letter, it's against the law,
The letter?
a letter, like a
Personal letter.
personal letter.
Well, the listing contract says the default is that no personal letters will be given to the seller unless the seller opts in. And the biggest reason we don't want to do that, because people send pictures, and it can be deemed to be discriminatory when somebody denies them or doesn't accept their offer.
Even for rates.
Yeah, oh yeah, we never want anyone submitting a picture with an application. Once an application for a rental is accepted, then it's okay to ask for a driver's license at that point in time.
Yeah, but again, a personal letter with the offer, that's okay.
It's not illegal, you can submit it, but the default response in the listing contract is that the listing agent is not going to present that to the seller. The seller's going to have to check a box saying, I'm opting in to receive any of those letters that the buyers are submitting.
Oh, they have to check.
Yes, they have to opt in to that. If I'm a listing agent, I don't want to give them those letters. Yeah. I'm always more careful than many people.
And if,
So, what?
and if I discuss it with them later on, can they put the check mark?
There's nothing you can't do, Ray. You can modify the listing contract. I'm not sure why you would want to do that. Why would you want to put them in the position that someone can claim discrimination?
If a buyer's agent submits an offer with the letter and we're going by the default saying that they're not going to accept them.
I would return it, say, we can't, submit that to the seller.
So resubmit without the letter.
Yeah, that would be the ideal situation, resubmit without the letter. Seller doesn't want that information. Has instructed me to not accept offers with any of these letters, as a matter of fact. Pictures, things like that. We're getting close to the end here, guys. Isn't that good? And then section 9.8. What happens often, we're talking about 9.8 subsection B. There are times when you cannot get a hold of the listing agent, or the listing agent's refusing to respond. If they don't within 24 hours, you have the right to go directly to the seller to present that offer. If they're not responding, what we do typically, I'll contact the broker, notify them, listing agent hasn't responded. I want you to be aware, we're going to be contacting the seller directly. Let's see, and then 9.9, buyer broker as a buyer, you have to disclose the fact before you submit an offer of the property you intend to buy an interest in. And then 9.10, you must always accompany a buyer or your clients to the property unless the seller has given written permission for you to allow them to access the property without your presence. Then statuses. So let's just go through that quickly. Coming soon. If you're going to put a property in coming soon, it can't be for more than 21 days. You can't show a property during coming soon. You can actively market the property, but as soon as you show the property, within 1 day, you must place it in a traditional active status on the MLS. Coming soon is still an active status. Active, it just means we're soliciting contracts. Active under contract, well, I received a contract. Let's see. And then hold, there is no showings permitted when a property is in a hold status. As a matter of fact, if you change a property to a hold status, you must have something in writing before changing it. And you must have something in writing changing it back from hold to an active status. Each and every time. Sunny had a transaction she was involved in, it wasn't her listing. 8 different times, the status was changed from hold to active. And of course, somebody filed a complaint.
So why people they do that?
Why do they do that? That's a good question.
Why they put it on?
Well, first of all, you put it on hold, the days of market stop accruing. And I can see why a seller may want to put a property on hold, because maybe there's renovations, someone's sick in the house, there could be issues like that.
If they put a hold, it's still the days goes.
No, days on market do not accrue. But you must have something in writing instructing you, it could be a text, to put it on hold and then to change it back from hold. You were assisting somebody with their contract, weren't you, Sonny, in regards to managing their contract on that one? So that was interesting. She had 8 pages that she had to have signed by the seller after the fact. Otherwise, it's $500 for each infraction. So that would have been a $4,000 fine. It's crazy, huh? And it's another agent that reported this infraction, or what was deemed to be an infraction, okay? Reporting of sales, you have 2 days to change the status. We're almost done.
So Rich, you said that a notice is required to put it on hold and then another one to take it off.
Yes,
Can you just say, just do one, say put it on hold from this date to this date?
you could. You could do that. Yeah, you can give an end date. There's no question about that. And then let's see.
So if you have a property, with the listing agent, and you already have the property already sell. You have to put it on the MLS and it's incoming soon or something, and you got the client right away, you have to put it inactive to do it.
You have 2 days to change the status if you sold it, was coming soon and it's sold. And you can do that going from coming
Right,
soon
right.
to sold. You can, yeah,
Okay.
you can do that. Yeah. Then we're almost done here. And then let's see, we're just gonna skip over some of these things. So pictures, please. Even if you're the listing agent, don't copy the pictures from the multiple listing service, because if their watermark is duplicated, even if they're your pictures, it's a violation. So you can use your own pictures. If you use someone else's pictures, be sure that you get written authorization beforehand. Don't copy them from the MLS. That will be a violation no matter what. And then submission of photography, 11.5.1. And I'm just about done talking here. You must have one picture of depicting the exterior of the property. Now, we see a lot of times listings, there may be 30 pictures or 100 pictures in there. 100 is probably an extreme example. I don't think there's space for 100 pictures. But then we see at the end of the listing, before it has been closed out, the agents will remove all the pictures. That's acceptable. But once the listing is closed out, you cannot remove anything from the multiple listing service.
I think you gotta leave one picture.
Just one.
Yeah.
Just one. That is correct. Correct. So that's all I have for today.
On the contract, is that they still accepting other applications or other
Yes,
offers?
yes.
And when it's pending, no more.
It's the seller is not soliciting additional offers, but regardless, that's a good question, because I scanned over or actually skipped over that. Regardless of the fact of whether it's pending, doesn't matter. If you receive offers, you have an obligation to present all offers to the seller. And then what about verbal offers? You have an obligation to present verbal offers to the seller also. As ludicrous as that sounds. Okay, so change in status, it's always 2 days. The only time it's 1 day is if you go from not actively marketing the property to actively marketing it, to change the status within 1 day.
Sorry, I know you want to finish, but so verbal offers, but if it states in the comments on MLS, offers must be accompanied by blah, 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 you can't do that with a verbal offer.
It's meaningless just because someone said that in the MLS, it must be accompanied by this. If someone says, I want to offer $1 million on that property, theoretically, you have an obligation to present that offer to the seller.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
I'll shut up.
No, I think it's a good question. It's who would ever think you have to present a verbal offer, but we don't want to give this or not give the seller the opportunity to do whatever is necessary. You just tell them, you know, they're not that serious. Obviously, all they did was say, this is what I'm willing to offer. Any other questions? No? Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming today.
Oh,
What?
next week we have the awards luncheon. So
That's
for
right.
those of you that have not RSVP'd, please email me or let me know. Next
Yes, is that-
Tuesday at Prego here at the district.
Okay. At what time?
At noon, 12
At
o'clock
noon.
noon. Yeah.
Okay,
That's open.
food and drinks.
Food and drinks.
That's what gets everybody to
The
attend.
drinks, that's what-
Thank you.
So everybody turn their card in?
All right.
Okay, any wants and needs before we wrap this up?
Oh, yeah.
Just to share it.
I'm looking
Oh, I'm
for-
sorry. Okay, well, they probably want to see what's going on.
Yeah.
I have a client that's looking for leasing at least four bedrooms, backyard, garage, and this Long Beach. From Seal Beach to, what it calls, the little channel, heights, no Signal Hills, but the next one here is, from Long Beach, Seal Beach to, what is it? Huntington Beach? No, it's towards north. So they're looking.
That area in Long Beach where there's the lake and a channel around
Yeah, that's the channel, Naples.
Naples, that's right.
Yeah. If somebody has somebody, the 6,000 is maximum that they're gonna pay for it.
Hmm.
It's
not gonna happen in Naples.
Having there, Candleberry is in Seal Beach.
Uh-huh,
It's a pool place. It's beautiful. So, but it's kind of towards to the inland, so it has to be a little bit more.
okay,
If somebody knows.
All right, Carl, go ahead. and
good luck for
do-
$6,000 because those homes range from 4 to 8
No,
acres
no, no.
actually,
around Naples.
4,000, and some 4,000, 5,000.
Oh, yeah?
And up to 6,000.
Yeah.
Just-
Well, they're okay with 3 bedrooms.
Are they?
Yeah.
You've got a big smile, I can. And Armando,
Okay,
Wow.
Commence. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Okay.
all right.
Next week will be a lot more fun than this.
Yeah.